He didn't look at her face. He looked at her white gloves. The kind, fine restaurants issued to staff who carried expensive things for people who would never learn their names. He looked at the silver cloche she held, perfectly balanced in her steady hands. Then he turned to the woman beside him, said something in Japanese, and smiled. To Arashi Mizuki, the waitress standing before him was not a person. She was scenery. Interchangeable. A body the evening had arranged to carry his food and absorb his presence without complicating it. He thought Japanese was a sealed room, a private language he could use to say whatever he wished about her, to her face, without consequence. He was about to learn the cost of that assumption, because the woman holding his silver cloche was not just a waitress. She had spent 4 years in Tokyo earning the right to speak the very language he was now using as a weapon. And the words she was about to say would not simply silence the dining room, they would end his evening, expose his character, and return her to a life she had been forced to abandon. This is the story of what happens when arrogance picks the wrong target. Welcome to Levita Tales, a place where the people they speak over always speak last. If that's the kind of story that makes you lean forward in your seat, hit subscribe. Because what she says next, and what it costs him, is only the beginning. The air inside Cairo, Manhattan's most coveted Japanese fusion dining room, smelled of lacquered cedar, seared wagyu, and money that had long stopped apologizing for itself. For Ivy Amarie, it mostly smelled like hour 10 of a 12-hour shift. She pressed her white gloves tighter at the wrists. A habit, not a necessity. Perfection was the only currency guests at Cairo ever noticed about her, because perfection produced invisibility, and invisibility meant she kept her job. Somewhere behind her, Ben, the floor manager, was already calling her name. She lifted a tray, steadied her face, and moved. Ivy Ameri was 27 years old. To the guests of Cairo, she was functional architecture. The gloved hand that delivered each course without a tremor, the neutral voice that recited specials without inflection, the figure that answered a snapped finger with, "Of course, sir," and never let the cost of that answer show on her face. And what they did not know was that 4 years ago, she had been a graduate student in Japanese language and cultural studies at the Tokyo University of Foreign Studies, the only Black woman in her cohort, and that she had graduated at the top of her class. Her thesis on code switching and linguistic identity had been called by her advisor, Professor Aaron Hasegawa, the most precisely argued work his department had seen in a decade. She had called her younger sister Ashari from the library's steps after her final defense, voice breaking. We did it. We, because everything Ivy did, she carried Ashari somewhere inside it. 3 weeks later, Ashari was diagnosed. The treatment plan, the specialist visits, the ongoing care. The numbers added up to something that bore no relationship to anything Ivy owned. She left Tokyo within the month. The career, the research post, the future she had built. All of it left behind. Now there was a jar on her kitchen table in the Bronx, labeled in her own handwriting, her future. Tonight it held $619. Kess, the bartender, caught her eye as she passed the service bar. Table 12. Careful. Ivy already knew. She had heard the name spoken during the pre-service briefing, the way you speak the name of an approaching storm. Arashi Mizuki. Silver-haired, silver-tongued CEO of Mizuki Global Holdings. A man who had built an empire on deciding what things were worth, and had been right so often that the world had stopped questioning his judgments. She crossed the floor with the smile she had spent 2 years calibrating. She set down the menu cards. She began the greeting. Arashi did not look up. Instead, he spoke. In Japanese. Rapid, colloquial, addressed entirely to his business partner Kagami as though Ivy were not present. He ordered. And then, He threaded through the order with the ease of a man who had never once worried about being understood. He made his observations about the restaurant's declining standards, about the woman standing before him, her posture, her presence, the assumption that someone like her understood nothing of the real conversation happening in this room. The words settled in the air. Around the table, no one reacted. No one understood. Arashi leaned back, waiting for the polite confusion he had ordered alongside his meal. Ivy felt something shift in her chest. Not anger, something older. The part of her that had stood in a Tokyo seminar room and earned, 1 year at a time, the right to speak these exact words. She looked at Arashi Mizuki, really looked at him, and she made a choice. Cairo didn't ask for your attention. It commanded it. The amber pendant lights hung low over each table like small, deliberate suns, warm enough to make wealth look golden, dim enough to make the rest of the world feel very far away. The scent of seared A5 Wagyu drifted from the kitchen in slow, expensive waves. Lacquered menus sat on each table as though they contained scripture. And tonight, every single member of staff moved with the particular tension of people who had been told, without being told, that one wrong step could cost them everything. Because Arashi Mizuki had a reservation at table 12. Ivy felt it the moment she walked through the service entrance, that invisible shift in the room's atmosphere, the way sound itself seemed to lower by half a degree. Ben, the floor manager, intercepted her before she had even pinned her name tag. His voice was clipped, quiet, surgical. Table 12. VIP. You carry, you pour, you disappear. No improvising. No lingering. Understood? Understood. She had been disappearing for 2 years. She was very good at it. She moved toward the service bar to collect the first sack flight. Kes stopped polishing a glass long enough to lean close. He sent back 3 sake selections last month, she murmured, her voice stripped of its usual warmth. Said the temperature was a personal insult. To him. Personally. Ivy absorbed this the way she absorbed everything at Cairo. Without flinching, even without showing it. She lifted the tray, crossed the floor. Falari, the hostess, was stationed near the entrance, clipboard in hand. As Ivy passed, Falari looked up, held her gaze for exactly 1 second, and mouthed 2 words without sound. Good luck. Ivy did not break stride. She could see table 12 ahead. The candlelight, the dark suit, the silver hair. She could hear the low register of a man who never needed to raise his voice to be obeyed. The other diners had already unconsciously shifted their chairs, their posture, their conversation, angling away, creating space, the way water moves around something immovable. Ivy stopped just outside table 12. She steadied the tray with her left hand. With her right, she reached for the handle of the silver cloche. Her fingers closed around it. She took 1 breath, straightened her spine, and stepped inside. She had been here before. Not at table 12, not in this dining room. In a different room entirely. Quieter, colder, smelling of old paper and overworked radiators. The seminar room at the Tokyo University of Foreign Studies. On the afternoon, her life was still the life she had planned. Professor R.N. Hasegawa did not give compliments lightly. In 4 years, Ivy had never once heard him use the word extraordinary. So when he stood at the front of the room, her thesis open in his hands, and read a full paragraph aloud to the cohort in the particular silence reserved for work that genuinely surprises someone, she hadn't known what to do with her own face. The applause that followed was small. Graduate seminars are not arenas, but it was real. And for a woman who had spent 4 years being the only one in every room she entered, the only black face, the only one who had to work twice as hard to be heard half as clearly, that small, real applause felt like oxygen. She had been seen, fully, for the first time. She called Ashari from the library steps, voice cracking. We did it. Not I. We. Because Ashari had been inside every late night, every rewritten paragraph, every moment Ivy had almost quit and didn't. 3 weeks later, Ashari called back. The specialist's number came the way devastating things always come. Quietly, matter-of-factly, as if the figure didn't represent the entire architecture of someone's future collapsing. Treatment. Ongoing management. Monthly visits. The total was not a number Ivy could negotiate with. It simply was. She booked the flight home within 48 hours. She left Tokyo the way you leave a burning building, with only what you could carry, and the knowledge that you were not coming back. Now the jar sat on her kitchen table. $619. Her sister's name written on it in permanent marker, because some things needed to be written down to stay real. Ivy blinked. The amber light of Cairo pulled her back. Table 12, directly in front of her now. And from across that table, his voice, still moving in Japanese, still unhurried, still utterly certain she understood nothing. He was still talking about her. And every single word she understood. All of it. Arashi Mizuki had not walked into Cairo so much as arrived in it. There is a difference. Walking is what everyone else does. Arriving is what happens when a room quietly reorganizes itself around a single presence without being asked. Kuro, Cairo's sommelier, a man with 22 years of experience and a composure trained to withstand almost anything, had straightened his posture the moment the reservation was confirmed. He was straightening it again now, as Arashi settled into his chair. At the adjacent table, Zuri Calloway, mid-conversation with her dinner companion, let her sentence trail off and glanced over. Just once. The recognition in her eyes was not admiration. It was the look of someone who knew exactly what kind of storm had just entered the room. Around the dining floor, other conversations dropped half a register. Not silence, just deference. The unconscious acoustics of power. Leela had arrived first. As she pulled out her own chair. A detail so small it would mean nothing to anyone not paying attention, but Ivy had been paying attention to small details for 2 years, and that one told her everything. Kagami Renma came last, jacket still buttoned, eyes moving across the room with the quiet efficiency of a man who cataloged threats before he cataloged anything else. And then there was Arashi. He hadn't opened the menu. Not once. He had waved it closed with 2 fingers the moment Falari placed it down. The way you wave away something offered by someone who should have known better. When Kuro approached with the evening's sock selection, a flight he had curated personally for this reservation, Arashi lifted one glass, held it briefly at eye level, and set it back down. The temperature, he said, still not looking at Kuro. Try again. Kuro nodded, said nothing, took the tray back. 22 years of expertise, dismissed in 4 words. This was the man Ivy was now serving. Tray balanced, gloves white, smile calibrated to precisely the right temperature. Warm enough, distant enough, invisible enough. She was 2 steps from the table when she caught it. Not the words yet, but the tone. That particular register a person uses when they are certain no one important is listening. Arashi was speaking in Japanese, and he was smiling. He started with the order. That was the pretense. The omakase tasting sequence. Yes, the sake pairing from the revised flight Kuro had rushed back. Fine, if they had corrected the temperature this time. The wagyu preparation. Specific, exacting, delivered in the clipped cadence of a man who assumed kitchens existed purely to execute his preferences without error. And then, without pausing, without lowering his voice by even half a degree, he kept going, still in Japanese. He still addressed to Kagami, still with that same relaxed, unhurried tone that made everything he said sound like observation rather than attack. He said that the way she carried herself suggested she was more accustomed to labor that didn't require this much performance. He said the restaurant had clearly adjusted its hiring standards, gesturing vaguely, the way you gesture at something beneath commentary. He said that women like this one probably smiled and nodded through every table they served, understanding nothing beyond the surface of what was asked of them. That the real conversation always happened above their heads. That this was simply how it was. He said it the way you state weather? Kagami said nothing. His eyes moved to his water glass. Leela's smile, the one she had been maintaining with quiet, practiced effort since they arrived, finally slipped. Just slightly. Just enough. Cairo continued its elegant hum. Not one Cairo continued its elegant hum. Not one other diner looked up. The words had been perfectly sealed, delivered in a language designed to be invisible in a room full of people who didn't speak it. Arashi leaned back, recrossed his ankle over his knee. The satisfied posture of a man who had just confirmed something he already believed. Ivy's pen had not moved. Her face had not changed. Her eyes had not dropped. She had absorbed every syllable, every casual, practiced cruelty, with the stillness of someone who had decided, somewhere between the service entrance and this moment, exactly how much she was willing to keep swallowing. The answer, it turned out, was not one word more. Something changed in her eyes. Not anger. If it had been anger, she might have swallowed it the way she had swallowed everything else for 2 years. Anger was manageable. Anger could be folded down and tucked away and carried home at the end of a shift. This was something else. Something older and far more precise. The part of Ivy Amory that 4 years in Tokyo had built. Examination by examination, late night by late night, quietly unlocking itself. She set her pen down on the notepad, slowly, deliberately, with the kind of care that signals not hesitation, but decision. And then Ivy Amory opened her mouth and spoke. In Japanese. Not the casual, colloquial Japanese Arashi had used as a private weapon. Keigo, the formal register. The highest tier of respectful address in the entire language. The speech level reserved for addressing those of superior status, deployed here with such flawless precision that it functioned, in this context, as something devastating. Perfect, weaponized courtesy. She began with his order. She noted, gently, technically, without a trace of heat, that the dashi preparation he had requested contained a pronunciation error, and that the dish he had actually named was a different preparation entirely. She recommended the correct term, in case he wished to order again. Then she addressed the sake pairing he had chosen and explained, with the calm specificity of someone who had written academic papers on Japanese culinary linguistics, precisely why it would conflict with the Wagyu's umami profile and what she would suggest instead. The room had gone very still. She wasn't finished. She thanked him, formally, graciously, in Keigo so precise it could have been lifted from a graduate textbook, for his commentary. She said she had heard every word, all of it. She hoped, she added, that the meal would exceed whatever expectations he had arrived with. Then she stopped and waited. Kagami's water glass hovered in the air, suspended halfway between the table and his mouth. Leela's napkin had risen, slowly, involuntarily, to cover her lips. Behind the service bar, Kes stood with a bottle of Yamazaki in one hand, completely motionless, having apparently forgotten she was holding it. Arashi Mizuki said nothing. For the first time all evening, possibly for the first time in years, Arashi Mizuki had absolutely nothing to say. And that silence? The entire room heard it. His face changed in 3 seconds. Not into embarrassment, not into shame, not even into surprise. Not really. What replaced the silence on Arashi Mizuki's face was something colder and far more deliberate. The shock dissolved first. Then came the stillness. And then, like a door closing very quietly in a very large house, calculation. He did not look at Ivy. He raised one hand, barely, just a slight elevation of two fingers. And Ben appeared at the table with the speed of someone who had been watching from the moment this interaction began, which he had. Arashi's voice, when he spoke, was almost warm. Measured. The tone of a man registering a reasonable concern with a reasonable establishment. There had been something in the dish, he said, an ingredient he reacted to. He had a documented sensitivity. Severe, in certain preparations. Knew of this without once turning his eyes toward Ivy. She was already being handled. She didn't warrant eye contact. Ben's face did not change, but Ivy watched him do the math. Saw it happen in real time behind his eyes. Mizuki Global Holdings, corporate account, 6 figures annually, a number Ben could not afford to argue with. He said, "Of course, Mr. Mizuki," and turned toward Ivy with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Apology. And beneath it, helplessness. "Mark has been called," he said quietly. "Please wait by the service corridor." Ivy did not move immediately. She stood very still and let the full weight of what was happening land precisely where it belonged. On her chest, on her lungs, on the part of her brain that knew exactly what losing this job meant. The jar. $619. Asheri's appointment on the 14th. 2 years of invisible endurance. 2 years of swallowed words and practiced smiles, and making herself small enough to survive in rooms like this one. And she had spoken. For 60 seconds, she had simply existed out loud. This was the price. Mark was already crossing the floor, and behind him, from the corner table, a silver-haired man in a quiet navy suit had set down his tea. He did not hurry. That was the first thing. In a room that had just accelerated, Mark crossing the floor, Ben hovering, the entire service staff recalibrating around the gravitational pull of Arashi Mizuki's complaint. The silver-haired man at the corner table simply rose from his chair. Unhurried, deliberate. The way people move when they have never once needed urgency to command a room. Kuro saw him first, and straightened. But differently this time. Not the rigid deference he had offered Arashi. Something closer to recognition. Respect that had been earned rather than purchased. The man walked toward the center of the floor and stopped. He looked at Mark. Then, with the same unhurried calm, he looked at Arashi. "I was seated at table 4 this evening," he said quietly in English. "I heard everything." The dining room, which had been pretending not to watch, stopped pretending. He recounted it precisely. Not emotionally, factually, with the specificity of someone who understood that facts, delivered without decoration, are the most devastating instrument available. He named what Arashi had said in Japanese. He quoted it. He explained, for the benefit of everyone present who did not speak the language, exactly what the words meant. He noted what Ivy had said in return, the register, the precision, the absolute accuracy of her correction. And then he noted, equally precisely, what she had not said, the parts she had swallowed, the grace she had extended to a man who had offered her none. Arashi's jaw tightened. "I don't see how any of this—" The man reached into his jacket, produced a card, placed it on the table in front of Mark without flourish, without theater, with the quiet finality of someone closing a chapter. Mark looked at it. Something shifted in his face. Arashi looked at it. And for the second time in one evening, the color left his face. Because the name on that card was not merely a name. The Callaway Cultural Exchange Institute sat on 47 international boards. Its annual report had been cited in 3 UN frameworks. Tosin Calloway did not make scenes. He made consequences. The allergen complaint was not mentioned again. Leela was already gathering her clutch. She did not look at Arashi when she stood. She did not say goodbye. She simply left. And in the particular way she left, it was clear that she had been waiting for a reason, and tonight had finally given her one. Arashi Mizuki walked out of Cairo without his dessert. Without Leela. Without a single word that could undo what the room had just witnessed, and Tosin Calloway turned, slowly, unhurried as ever, and looked directly at Ivy. She had made it as far as the coat check. Gloves still on. Hands very still. The amber light of Cairo's lobby pressing against the edges of everything with its particular warmth that had never once, in 2 years, felt like it was meant for her. She heard his footsteps before she turned. Unhurried. Of course. Ms. Amory. Tosin Calloway stopped a respectful distance away, hands clasped. No performance in his posture. Just presence. I'll be brief. Months. The lobby held its breath. So did. I've been looking for you, he said. For 18 months. The lobby held its breath. So did Ivy. He described the Kyoto Symposium, the afternoon session, the third-floor reading room, the paper that had been submitted under a graduate student's name, and proceeded to stop 3 senior researchers mid-conversation. Her paper. Her argument about code switching, linguistic erasure, the way language was used not merely to communicate but to assign worth and withhold it. Then he quoted it. 2 lines, her lines, spoken back to her in this lobby, in this borrowed uniform, with her white gloves still on and her tips folded in her apron pocket. Words she had written at a desk in Tokyo at 2 in the morning, when she still believed she was building something permanent. She felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Those 2 lines, Tosin said quietly, appear in 3 international policy frameworks currently under active review. One of them is before the UN Cultural Heritage Committee. Right now, this month. Ivy's throat closed. Your words have been changing things, Ms. Amory, while you've been here. They've been out there, working, without you. He told her about the position, Director of Translation and Cultural Research at the Calloway Institute. He told her about the medical partnership, the facility, the specialists, the full coverage. Ashari's name did not need to be spoken. He had done his research. He said it plainly, without theater. Everything Ashari needed would be handled. Ivy looked down at her white gloves. 2 years. The jar. The practiced smiles. The 60 seconds tonight that had nearly cost her everything, and had somehow led her here instead. The first tear fell before she decided to let it. She did not wipe it away. When? She asked. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Tosin's expression did not change, but something in it settled. The quiet satisfaction of a man who has been patient for a very long time and has just been proven right. There's one condition, he said. 6 months. That is all it took. 6 months for a life that had been held underwater to finally break the surface and breathe. Ivy Amory sat at the head of the conference table at the Calloway Cultural Exchange Institute and let that settle for exactly 1 moment before the room needed her attention again. Natural hair, charcoal blazer, a leather binder embossed with her name, her full name, her title, resting open in front of her. No white gloves, no calibrated smile, no invisible architecture, just Ivy, just the work. Just the future she had written a thesis about before life interrupted and redirected her. Here, of all places. Through a dining room, through 60 seconds of speaking when everything in her 2 years of training had said to stay quiet. Ashari called that morning, the way she did every Thursday now. Her voice was stronger, not just physically, but in the particular way of someone who had been told their future was uncertain and had decided, quietly and absolutely not to accept that verdict. She was talking about next year, making plans, using the word when instead of if. Ivy had to turn away from her office window so her research assistant Marcus wouldn't see her face. Then there was the news about Arashi. 3 separate shareholder complaints. His firm under formal investigation. Kagami Renma had departed the board so quietly that the press release had been buried on a Friday afternoon. The corporate equivalent of hoping no one notices. The empire that had once made Kuro straighten his spine and other diners lower their voices had developed, it turned out, significant cracks beneath its polished surface. The kind that spread. And then, her phone buzzed. An unknown number. A single line of text. I always knew you understood. Leela. Ivy read it twice. Set the phone face down. Looked out at the city. She thought about the jar, the gloves, the silver cloche balanced in her hands night after night in a room that had decided she was furniture before she ever opened her mouth. She did not think of it with bitterness. She thought of it the way you think of the room where you finally remembered something essential about yourself, with a kind of fierce, quiet gratitude. Because that room had not broken her. It had aimed at her, and missed. Ivy Amory closed the binder, stood, and looked out at a city full of people who had not yet been seen. She knew exactly what that felt like. She knew, too, what it took to be the person who finally looked. She was no longer furniture. She was the architect, and she was just getting started. If Ivy's story moved you, if you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or talked past in a language the room assumed you didn't speak, hit that like button right now. Subscribe so you never miss a story like this one, and drop a comment below. What was the moment you stopped being invisible? Tell us. This community is built for exactly that conversation. We'll see you in the next one.